My name is Zoe, 33 years old, and I'm a high school literature teacher at a public school on the outskirts of Seattle. I live a simple, modest life, and my family looks down on me for it. At this year's Christmas party, under crystal chandeliers and a live orchestra, my parents gave my younger sister, Emma, the pampered darling since childhood, a Tiffany diamond ring worth $12,000. And me, the eldest, the one who sacrificed everything for the family, received a pair of cheap wool socks, tagged on sale for $3 at an outlet store. In front of more than 40 guests, my father laughed loudly and said, "Our eldest daughter doesn't need much. She's used to living frugally." Cameras flashed, laughter rang out like knives into my pride. I pressed my lips together, nodded, forcing myself to stay composed. No one knew that in my purse that night was a secret will, something that could shatter the entire power structure they had built. Have you ever been treated as invisible by your own family, even though you were the one always there when they needed you? If favoritism has ever scarred you, leave a comment below. Hit like, subscribe, and follow me through this story because what happened after that night was something no one in my family could have ever imagined. I stood frozen in the grand hall, glowing with golden light, every wall reflecting chandeliers that hung nearly 2 stories high. The mansion on Queen Anne Hill still carried its cold, haughty grandeur, a luxury that never truly belonged to me. The air was filled with the scent of cedarwood, cinnamon, and red wine. A Christmas tree more than 10 feet tall towered in the corner, adorned with Waterford crystal ornaments, Italian silk ribbons, and hundreds of twinkling lights that looked like frozen stars. Every corner displayed framed family photos in gilded frames, most of them of Emma. Emma at a fashion debut in Milan, Emma on stage in couture, Emma smiling in our parents' arms at her lavish 25th birthday party at the Fairmont Hotel. And me? Not a single framed photo of me in a graduation gown or a milestone moment of my own hung in that house. It wasn't surprising. I had grown used to being invisible in my own family. "Emma, open this one, sweetheart." My mother, Carolyn, waved her over, her voice syrupy, sweet, but reserved only for Emma. Emma glided into the circle of relatives, her golden curls bouncing, her ivory silk dress hugging her petite frame like it was tailored in Paris. When she peeled back the metallic paper, the whole room held its breath. "Oh my God!" Emma gasped, pulling from a velvet box a sparkling diamond ring. "It's Tiffany, this season's holiday design." She lifted her hand, letting the light catch on the dazzling stone. "Just a little something," my father, Douglas, said warmly, raising his glass of brandy. "You deserve it, sweetheart. Daddy's princess should always have the best." Applause erupted. A few relatives laughed. Cameras clicked. No one noticed me standing less than 6 feet away. A moment later, my mother stepped toward me with a faint smile. She handed me a small box wrapped in cheap foil paper with a red sticker scrawled to Zoe. I sat down and carefully unwrapped it. Inside was a pair of gray wool socks, the $3 kind sold at Target on Black Friday. No card. No handwritten note, no encouraging smile. I nodded slightly, murmured thanks out of habit. But inside I felt colder than the wind outside the window. "Oh, Zoe doesn't need much," my mother said to the aunt beside her. "She's used to saving." I heard it clearly. Everyone did. But no one reacted, no one objected. They only smiled, as if it were an undeniable truth. I glanced at the gift table to my right. Piled high were Louis Vuitton bags, Japanese massage devices, luxury spa vouchers, all tagged for Emma. And me? I quietly slipped the socks into my purse and sank into the red velvet armchair in the corner, beneath the ancestor portrait above the fireplace. I used to dream of seeing a photo of myself on that wall. Now I only wanted to leave. I excused myself to the back garden to get some air. No one asked why. No one stopped me. I slid open the glass door, leaving behind the merry carols and the wine-soaked chatter. Outside, the yard was dusted in snow. Strings of lights clung to the bare grape arbor, glowing faintly. I sat on the wooden steps and exhaled deeply. Less than an hour ago, I had hoped to feel like I belonged here. I had spent 3 weeks choosing a cashmere scarf from Italy in olive green, my mother's favorite color. I'd saved for 2 months to buy a silver fountain pen engraved with my father's name, because he once told me handwritten notes were the mark of a true businessman. And I had wrapped a rare print of a classic novel Emma once mentioned back in September, with a handwritten 2-page letter tucked inside. I hadn't expected material rewards. I only wanted them to look at me the way they looked at Emma. Zoe? I looked up. It was Aunt Helen, my mother's sister, the only relative who had always treated me kindly. She wore a wool shawl, holding a glass of wine. "Are you all right?" she asked, sitting down beside me. I pressed my lips together, shook my head. "Just a little cold, Auntie." She studied me for a long moment. "Zoe, you don't deserve this treatment. I know how hard you've worked all these years. I see it." Her words lodged in my throat. How long had it been since anyone had recognized me? I turned to her. "I don't understand why the quieter I stay, the more they dismiss me." She placed a hand on my shoulder. "Because you've let them for too long. But Zoe, no one can step into the light if they keep standing in the shadows." I fell silent. Under the dim garden lights, I touched the purse in my coat pocket. Inside was the old envelope my grandfather had left me, the only man in the family who ever truly listened to me. I had never opened it, but tonight I knew I had to. Not for revenge, but to protect my own worth. Through the window, I saw Emma snapping photos of her Tiffany ring for Instagram. My mother pouring more champagne, my father laughing with business partners. None of them believed I could ever amount to anything. But I held something they didn't, the truth. And I was about to use it to rewrite my place in the Turner family. I returned to my small apartment in North Seattle just as the clock struck 11 p.m. The streetlight cast shadows across the worn wooden floor and shelves lined neatly with books. I hung my coat, set my purse on the table, and sat in silence, clutching the envelope my grandfather Henry had left me as if it still carried his last warmth. I stared at it for a long time. His handwriting remained steady and bold. The ivory paper, edged in faded blue, had yellowed with age but never crumpled. I had kept it intact, like a silent promise I never dared to open. I remembered the autumn day I received it at 21, turning down a full Yale scholarship in literature to stay home and care for him during chemotherapy. My mother said hiring a nurse was too expensive. My father agreed, adding a line that slapped my pride raw. "You'll have other opportunities, but family only comes once." And Emma? She still got to move to New York to study visual arts at a private institute costing over $70,000 a year. Everything paid for. Grandfather said nothing then. He only watched me quietly. The next day, he left this envelope in my nightstand with a note. "Zoe, when you're ready." I tore the seal slowly. Inside was a letter in blue ink and a certified document from the law firm of Donald and Reeve, stamped and sealed. The handwritten letter was barely a page, but each line carried more faith than I had ever found in my parents. "My dear Zoe," it began. "I know you've sacrificed more than anyone cares to admit. You are bright, brave, and always put others first. But I want you to understand, that doesn't mean you must accept being forgotten." Tears stung my eyes. "I've created a private trust, granting you 40% of Turner Real Estate Holdings, effective only if your father or Emma attempts to transfer full ownership without your presence on the board. The documents are signed with attorney Donald Reeve, sealed at the state office. You don't need to act now, just keep the original, and when you decide it's necessary, use it." I gripped the paper, feeling something unfamiliar surge inside, not revenge, but a kind of justice I never thought I could hold. Something no snide comment or dismissive silence could take away. Memories of childhood rushed back like a flood. I remembered my 12th birthday, a small cake from Safeway, the icing misspelling "Happy Birthday Zoe" as Zoe. My mother laughed it off. "Who cares, as long as it's edible?" I said nothing, took a slice, and went upstairs to study. 3 years later, Emma's 16th birthday was held in the ballroom of the Renaissance Hotel. A white Parisian dress, a four-course buffet, a private DJ, and more than 100 guests. I remembered my father raising his champagne and boasting, "This girl will do great things. She has taste, style not like her sister, stuck with dusty books." That line drove me to leave early. No one asked why. Another year, I won first place in the state essay contest. The prize was a campus tour of East Coast universities. I was thrilled. But when I brought the letter home, my mother glanced at it and shook her head. "Doesn't fit the family schedule. It's the same week as the board meeting. Neither of us can take you." So I didn't go. I wasn't old enough to travel alone. Meanwhile, Emma flew to Tokyo to absorb cultural inspiration for her art. I still keep the photo of her under cherry blossoms in Ueno Park. Ivory coat, radiant smile. "Zoe, why can't you ever earn their attention?" I once asked myself in a sleepless night. Not because I hadn't tried, but because they never truly saw me. Only grandfather Henry was different. Every time I visited, he looked up from his book and asked about my dreams, about what I wanted to write, teach, or explore. He never told me what I should do, he only asked what I wanted. I remember one winter evening when we sat on the porch, sipping hot tea in silence. He said, "That pine tree out there doesn't bloom, Zoe. It's not as radiant as the cherry blossoms your sister loves, but it stands strong through storms. And come Christmas, people still choose it to carry the star on top." I slid the certified document back into a folder, locked it in my small safe, then poured myself tea and sat by the window, watching the snow fall thinly on the porch. I didn't have a grand ballroom. No one gave me $1,000 gifts. But I had something they never expected, the right to choose when to rise, and the means to do it with dignity. And when that moment comes, I will no longer be silent. I sat for a long while in the dark, with a cup of tea growing cold beside me. Outside, Seattle lay silent in the wintry stillness of year's end. Snow fell quietly over the streets, the glow of street lamps cutting through the window, stretching across the living room wall in dim, hazy streaks. I opened the drawer by my bed, the place where I kept the most important things in my life. An old scholarship letter from Yale, a photo from my college graduation, a few birthday cards from students, and a silver bank key labeled in handwriting, vault number 16, Northern Trust Bank. That key had come in the second envelope my grandfather Henry sent me just a few weeks before he passed away. At the time, I was struggling with a full teaching schedule and student loans I hadn't even paid halfway down. I still remember his voice, whether in letters or in memory, short, calm, and always leaving an echo that lingered long after. "You don't need to rush. But if one day you feel cornered, dismissed, or cut out of what you rightfully deserve, bring this key to the bank. The truth will not change. But you will need it to protect yourself." For 3 years I hadn't dared touch his words. Partly out of fear, partly because I still clung to the faint hope that recognition from my family might come naturally, not through paperwork and lawyers. But tonight, after being humiliated at the Christmas party as if I were a stranger, I knew I couldn't keep living as though I had no rights. The next morning, I took a half day off from teaching. I put on a long gray wool coat, a beret, and drove downtown. The Northern Trust Bank headquarters stood inside an old red brick building near Pier 6, quiet and solemn, like the secrets it guarded. A middle-aged woman in a navy suit, name tag reading Melissa Grant, greeted me with professional courtesy. "I'm Zoe Turner," I said, handing over my ID. "I need access to safe deposit box number 16. My grandfather, Henry Turner, left me the key and a letter of authorization." She checked the documents, had me sign, and then escorted me through 3 layers of security doors before stopping in front of a thick gray steel door. "You can stay as long as you need," Melissa said, slipping the key into the lock before quietly stepping away. Inside was a metal box about 2 feet long, heavy enough that I had to lift it with both hands. I placed it on the table and opened it. Neatly arranged documents sat inside, along with a wax-sealed envelope. I opened the first letter. My grandfather's voice returned in every line. "Zoe, if you are reading this, it means you've stopped waiting for recognition from those who should have given it to you long ago." I paused. My heart thudded in my chest. Inside is the trust agreement for Turner Real Estate Holdings established in 2017. It takes effect upon my passing, and if the remaining parties attempt to exclude you from rightful ownership, you hold 40% of the company's shares, protected by 2 provisions. 1. Shares cannot be sold or transferred without your consent. 2. If the board of directors is restructured without your name, the trust will immediately suspend the voting rights of the other members for up to 18 months, or until legal heirs are reinstated. I nearly held my breath as I turned to the rest. Notarization stamped by the state of Washington, my grandfather's signature, attorney Donald Reeves' signature, and 2 witnesses. What I held wasn't just paperwork. It was proof of the truth I had been forced to live without for too long. No one believed I could influence the company. No one thought I had a place in the Turner Empire. But now, they were wrong. I tucked the documents into a leather file folder, held it close to my chest, and walked out of the bank. Outside, a light breeze blew, not too cold. Still, I shivered not from the weather, but from the feeling of having real power in my hands without begging anyone for it. Driving back to my apartment, my phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen. I hesitated, then picked up. "What are you up to?" Emma's voice was bright, almost excited. "Dad just told me there's a special shareholders meeting this weekend. I think it's about transferring some shares to me, maybe to prep me for a new management role." "You coming?" I pressed my lips together. "I have other plans, but I'll be sending over some important papers." Emma scoffed. "Honestly, I don't think you need to worry. You've never really had anything to do with the company anyway." I didn't respond. I quietly hung up, opened my laptop, and began drafting an email to attorney Donald Reeve, attaching the scanned trust documents with a short note. "I need you to verify and prepare legal representation for the upcoming shareholders meeting. It's time to use what Mr. Henry left me, not to win, but to never be disregarded again." I was preparing lesson plans for next week's American literature class when the landline rang. The old cream-colored phone with a coiled cord, the only gift my mother had given me when I moved into this small apartment, still sat in plain sight, a reminder that she could call whenever she wished. I hesitated before picking up. "Zoe." My mother's voice came through, no greetings, no warmth. "The roof here has started leaking. The wood's rotted. The contractor says it all needs replacing. Nearly 40,000. I think you should pitch in." I clenched the pencil in my hand. "I can't cover that." "Zoe, that house is yours too. You grew up there, all those memories. I don't want to borrow from the bank. Interest rates are sky high right now." "Mom," I said calmly, "I'm still paying down student loans, covering rent, health insurance, and even helping with supplies for my underprivileged students every month. I can't take on more." On the other end, silence, then her voice tightened, nearly hissing. "You're always calculating. Emma never refuses when family needs her." I bit down hard. "Emma isn't the one teaching 6 classes a week to cover budget cuts, and I've never asked you for a cent. That's because you've never sacrificed anything for anyone, she snapped coldly. I hung up before my emotions could spill out. I had heard enough of those words for over a decade, but this time, I didn't feel guilt, just emptiness. 2 days later, an email from my father arrived, subject line, Emma's tuition, urgent. He explained that Emma had been accepted into an advanced intensive program in Florence, 8 weeks long, with tuition over 12,000, not including living expenses. He asked me to front the money to preserve the Turner family's image with international partners. I didn't reply right away. That evening, Emma threw a farewell party before leaving for Italy and posted pictures on Instagram. I only saw them because a colleague whose cousin worked in interior design sent me screenshots. Under one photo, Emma had written, "My sister will never understand what living with style really means. She thinks a work sweater counts as fashion." The picture showed Emma in a red backless dress, Tiffany ring flashing, smiling at the camera. Beside her was me, in a plain gray crewneck sweater, holding a glass of cider. I didn't even remember allowing anyone to take that picture. I didn't remember smiling that night either. I stared at her caption below. Family is everything. Even with differences, we always stand by each other. Thank you, Zoe, for teaching me a valuable lesson. You can live simply, but never forget to dream big. I read it over and over, trying to decipher where sincerity ended and mockery wrapped in moral tone began. That night, I called my father. "I read your email," I said flatly. "Good," he answered. "I thought you'd step up. I can't pay Emma's tuition." "Zoe, don't be difficult. This is about the family's honor." "No," I said clearly. "This is about personal choice. I'm not a bank. You're putting your sister in a bind." His voice sharpened. "She told us her big sister would never let her miss such an opportunity. When did Emma's dreams become my obligation?" Silence. Then his tone dropped lower. "Zoe, you're more selfish than we thought." I gave a short laugh, not out of joy, but at finally hearing the familiar accusation. If refusing to bankroll this family makes me selfish, then I guess I've been too generous for 33 years. I hung up. 3 days later, an envelope arrived, stamped with the Turner Real Estate Holdings logo. Inside was an official invitation to the special shareholders meeting, yes, the one Emma had mentioned. At the bottom, a handwritten note, "Invite Zoe Turner to attend as an observer without voting rights." I folded the letter, placed it beside my grandfather's trust papers in the safe. They still believed I had no place at the table where big decisions were made. They forgot I held a trust document with greater legal weight than any invitation, and I would not walk into that meeting as a guest. I would walk in as a co-owner, the forgotten one but not the erased one. I was in the teacher's lounge, preparing material for an upcoming creative writing workshop, when the door creaked open. A tall man stood there, silver hair, a neat brown suit, his face so familiar it stunned me for a moment. "Zoe?" he asked, voice calm and steady. "Do you still recognize me?" I blinked, then rose to my feet. "Mr. Donald?" It was Donald Reeve, my grandfather's long-trusted attorney, the very man who had witnessed the trust being established. His measured gaze was unchanged, as if nothing in this world could rush him. "I came to visit my granddaughter," he said, stepping inside. "She's in 5th grade upstairs. I noticed your name on the schedule board. It's been a while since we spoke." I offered him a seat, poured him tea from my thermos. "Did you open the vault?" he asked plainly. I nodded. "And did you read it all?" "Yes," I said, my hands trembling slightly as I held the cup. "I scanned the trust and emailed it to you. Have you reviewed it?" "I have," he nodded. "But that's not everything." I looked up. I thought that was the entirety of what my grandfather left me. Donald opened his leather case, pulled out a slim file, and slid it across to me. "This is an extension of the trust. Henry came to my office a week before his final hospitalization. He said if Douglas, your father, tried to consolidate everything under Emma, then the shares would default to the priority heir within 36 months of his passing, if the rightful heir failed to claim them. I opened the file, scanning the lines. Each sentence landed like a blow to my chest. So if I stay silent, I whispered, then by the end of this quarter, all the shares Henry left you will legally merge into Douglas and Emma's ownership, per company bylaws. Without my consent? If you don't claim them, legally it counts as forfeiture, he said gently. And I fear Douglas knows this. I froze. Suddenly, every detail from the past months aligned. My mother's talk of consolidating assets for efficiency, my father's invitation labeling me only a guest, and Emma's smug certainty about stepping into a management role. Grandpa, you knew I wouldn't speak up right away, I whispered. He never blamed you, Donald replied. He only wanted you to have enough time to understand your own worth before facing them. I leaned back in my chair, my chest heavy as stone. I used to think silence was the only way not to hurt anyone. That if I kept living quietly, playing the role of the dutiful eldest daughter, eventually they would recognize I deserved respect too. But they never looked back. They only used that silence to clear the path for the one they had chosen all along. So, I said slowly, either I step forward and claim my rights, or I accept being erased from every decision in the company. You still have 8 days, Donald said. If you want to keep your shares, you must file the inheritance declaration with the board of directors. You can send it through my office, I'll handle the rest. I looked at him, and for the first time I saw it clearly. I no longer had the option to keep peace and preserve dignity at the same time. My silence didn't protect anyone. It only let them erase me legally, quietly, and completely. Donald stood, adjusted his jacket. Whatever you decide, make sure it's for yourself, he said. You've lived too long carrying the weight for everyone else. I nodded, walked him to the door. When his figure disappeared down the hallway, I returned to the table and sat back down. My hand was still clutching the file. I laid it on the desk beside my lesson plans. The words in those pages weren't an opportunity or a weapon. They were proof of truths buried beneath polished appearances, hidden under layers of family prestige. If I stayed silent 8 more days, it would all be gone. But if I spoke, I would have to face them directly. My father, my mother, Emma, the company board, the relatives who had always seen me as an outsider. I closed my eyes and drew a deep breath. The room was so quiet I could hear the rhythm of my own heartbeat. Silence was still an option, but not when the truth was already in my hands. Not when I was the only one who still remembered what Grandpa used to say. Justice doesn't arrive with applause. It comes when someone is willing to stand up, even alone. That weekend, a text came from my mother, short but heavy with meaning. Family meeting this Sunday, 5 p.m. Dress properly. Don't be late. No greeting, no explanation. No mention of me refusing to pay Emma's tuition or the money for the roof repairs. As if none of it had ever happened. But I knew that silence, well, it wasn't forgiveness, it was preparation for a performance already scripted. I called Donald that night. His voice was steady, as always. Have you decided? He asked. Sunday evening, I replied. I want you there with me. He paused for a few seconds. Are you sure? I didn't hesitate. I won't stand aside anymore. At exactly 4:57 p.m., I parked in front of the Turner Mansion in West Queen Anne. Everything looked the same. Marble facade, wrought iron gates with curling patterns, rows of evergreens trimmed into spirals. But I could feel the tension clinging to every window pane. Donald arrived right after me, carrying his worn leather briefcase. We walked in together, shoes clicking softly on the polished stone floor. A housekeeper took my coat, her eyes flicking to Donald and quickly dropping, as if she knew something best left unspoken. The main living room was arranged for a formal gathering, a long table, leather chairs set in a semicircle, golden light from the chandelier, casting the room more like a shareholders' conference than a family meeting. My father sat at the center, in a charcoal suit, his hair grayer than I remembered. My mother was beside him, perfectly made up, hands tightly clasped. Emma stood behind them, draped in an ivory silk dress with a jeweled brooch, her face glowing as if she were about to step on stage. When Donald and I entered, every eye turned to us. My mother raised her brows, shifting slightly to the side. "Zoe," my father said, unable to hide his surprise. "We didn't think you would come." I walked to a chair near the end of the table, sat slowly, set my purse beside me, my gaze never leaving him. "Since I was invited as an observer, I didn't see the need to hurry," I replied. Emma let out a short laugh, covering her mouth as if to preserve her image. "Come now," my mother interjected, trying to steady the mood. "Tonight is important. We must stand united more than ever." My father nodded slightly, pulled a folder from his briefcase, and tapped it on the table to draw attention. "The company is going through an adjustment. Some investments didn't yield the results we hoped for, but everything is still under control." His voice was drier than before. His eyes twitched faintly when they landed on Donald, but he pressed on. "We've already met internally with the board. And with the consensus of the key members, I officially announce Emma will take the position of CEO of Turner Real Estate Holdings starting next quarter." Scattered applause broke from a few relatives seated around the room. Some turned toward me, curious about my reaction. Emma stepped forward, placing her hand lightly on my father's shoulder. "I am honored to accept this responsibility and promise not to let anyone down." I saw the gleam in my mother's eyes, full of pride. I saw the half-smile on my father's lips, like a man who believed he'd played the perfect move. "So," I said evenly, "the board reached a consensus, including me?" The room stilled. My father tilted his head. "Zoe, you don't have voting rights." Donald calmly placed his briefcase on the table, opened it, and drew out a sealed stack of documents. "Excuse me," he said. "I believe you've overlooked one detail." I slid the file toward my father, keeping my eyes on him. "Grandpa left me 40% of the company shares. The trust is notarized and binding. And if any executive decision is made without my consent, all voting rights will be suspended for 18 months. My mother set her glass down with a sharp clink. This can't be," she whispered. My father flipped through the pages, eyes locked on the stamps, the signatures, the dates. His hands trembled slightly when he reached the last page. Emma stepped closer, her voice nearly a snap. "Where did you dig this up?" "From Grandpa," I answered. "The only one in this family who didn't treat me like a shadow." "You're sabotaging the company," my father growled. "What do you want? The CEO's chair?" "No," I said. "I don't want that chair. I want my voice respected. And I won't let anyone decide the company's future without my legal presence." Donald nodded gently, producing a copy of the inheritance declaration already filed with the board. The documents were submitted on time. As of today, Miss Zoe Turner is a managing shareholder under Henry Turner's trust. The room fell silent. The chandelier's golden glow seemed to dim as bewildered, angry, and confused eyes fixed on me. I leaned back in my chair, said nothing more. They could try every trick to erase me, but they couldn't change the truth. I was an inseparable part of this legacy, no longer a sideline spectator, but a rightful voice in my own story. The entire mansion felt suffocating, though the fireplace burned bright and the chandelier shone warm. Those who had ignored me now stared, unsettled. My father flipped through the file again. desperate for a loophole, but every seal, every signature, every clause was airtight. His face paled as he glanced at Donald, though he tried to steady his tone. "This must be a misunderstanding," he said, turning to the relatives along the table. "Henry never told me about this. If he truly meant to give Zoe part of the company, why keep it from the family?" Donald calmly folded the papers, answering like a man, explaining facts in court. Henry didn't hide it. He entrusted it to the one he believed needed to hold it until the right time, and that time is now. Emma could no longer stay composed. She stormed forward, palms pressing hard against the oak table. "What kind of game are you playing?" she shouted, voice trembling. "Do you think a stack of papers can erase 3 years of my work at the company?" I stood, eyes locked on hers. "Work? 3 years? While you studied the art of living in Italy, I taught 3 shifts a day, scraped every dollar to pay down my loans. When Grandpa was sick, who gave up a Yale scholarship to care for him? You?" "Zoe, don't take that tone," my mother snapped. "This is a formal meeting." "Good," I replied, turning to her. "Then, let me state formally, from this moment forward, no decision at Turner Real Estate Holdings will pass without my signature, exactly as Grandpa's trust requires." My voice wasn't first-teaning, loud, but every word cut through the heavy silence. One of my uncles, Matthew, bent his head and muttered to his wife. Aunt Linda, usually quiet, looked at my mother with unhidden doubt. "I thought Zoe was never part of the business," she said softly. "She was always treated as an outsider." "So did I." My mother snapped back, then turned to me. "You never showed interest in the company. Why now?" "Because for years," I cut her off. My silence didn't mean blindness. "And it never meant I didn't exist," Emma snarled. "You're doing this out of jealousy. You've always envied me since we were kids." I let out a faint laugh. "Jealous? Of being coddled? Of being chosen without ever carrying responsibility? No, Emma. I'm not jealous. I'm just done living like a shadow beside a family that thinks love is automatic and exploits it like an obligation." My father shot up from his chair, his voice weighty. "By doing this, you're going against the entire family." I didn't look away from his eyes. "No," I said firmly. "I'm standing against injustice." Donald quietly closed his briefcase, preparing to leave. "I think this meeting should conclude here. Further legal matters will be handled through my office." My mother stepped forward, her voice tighter than usual. "Zoe, you don't understand what you're causing. The press, the partners, the employees, everyone will question this if you suddenly step in." "Then let them know," I answered, "that this company wasn't built by just one person, that Henry Turner made different choices, choices nobody wanted to see." Emma moved closer, her face flushed. "You're destroying me," she hissed. "You're robbing me of my only chance to prove myself to this family." "No one is destroying you," I said, not backing down. "Your own entitlement island. If you truly have ability, no legal decision can strip that from you." Silence stretched. My father exhaled heavily, searching for words to smooth things over, but there was no soft landing left. I slowly turned, walked out of the room with Donald beside me. I didn't wait for anyone to call me back. I didn't look at the confused stares burning into my back. The moment the door closed behind me, a draft swept through my thin coat. I stepped down the stone steps, the glow of light from inside fading behind me. In my pocket, I still gripped the copy of the documents, not just evidence of inheritance, but of a truth they had tried to bury for far too long. My presence had never been the issue. The problem was that they refused to accept I had rights. And tonight, that choice was no longer theirs to make. I thought maybe they'd leave it alone. A small part of me, however faint, still hoped that after everything, they'd finally stop. But only 3 days after the meeting, I received a letter from the law firm of Whitaker and Knox, Emma's personal attorneys. The message was short, cold. and struck like a blade to my dignity. Zoe Turner was accused of forging inheritance documents, violating intellectual property, and engaging in fraudulent acts that could compromise corporate transparency. I read that line over and over, my mind spinning as if I'd been doused with a bucket of icy water in the dead of winter. "She really thinks this will break me?" I muttered, staring at the black ink italics, the letter still in my hand. Donald met me later that afternoon at a small cafe on Mercer Street. He sat down, unwound his scarf, his face calm but missing the usual ease in his eyes. "I reviewed the file they submitted," he said. "They're playing dirty chess, Zoe. They want you to react the wrong way." I leaned back in my chair, exhaling. "Do they stand a chance?" "No," he answered immediately. "Your documents are legal, properly notarized, digitally traceable. But with the press, with neutral shareholders, sometimes planting doubt is enough to shake the ground." I nodded, my gaze drifting out the window where winter winds whipped the street, scattering flyers down the pavement. It felt just like my worth being dragged into the marketplace, bartered by strangers. "I never wanted it to go this far," I whispered. "You didn't start this," Donald said, his voice lower. "You're just the only one who hasn't run away." That night, I couldn't sleep. I pulled out every old folder, every envelope, every note my grandfather had sent. My small living room became a battlefield of papers and memories. I wasn't searching for anything specific, just hoping for a fragment, some piece that proved I wasn't alone in this story. Near 2A. M. When I opened a craft folder labeled Turner Holdings, internal 2007, I found a bundle of printed emails clipped together. On top, the subject line, "Request for personal financial assistance to Mr. Henry Turner." My hands trembled as I turned the page. The letter was from my father's personal email, dated October 15th of that year, the very year Emma was accepted into the Fashion Institute in New York. "Dear Father, I am requesting a loan of $150,000 to cover Emma's tuition and living expenses for her first 3 years of college. We will repay gradually as able, or surrender partial decision-making rights over shares if necessary. As you have often discussed privately with Zoe, we agree the condition is that Zoe will be recognized as the trust heir in the event of your passing before shares are officially divided." I read the last line again and again. My hand tightened around the paper. This wasn't just proof of a loan. It was a written acknowledgement that my inheritance rights had been agreed upon all along. No more doubt about legality. They had known, they had agreed, they had signed. They had simply never intended to honor it. I brought the document to Donald the next morning. He took it, silently, read it through. "Enough to topple their entire claim," he said at last. "This letter confirms they knew of your inheritance rights and more, that they leveraged those rights to get money. I want to present it," I said, "but not to humiliate them. I just want them to stop." "I understand," he replied. "But presenting this isn't just protecting yourself. It's protecting the truth Henry Turner fought to preserve until his last breath." 2 days later, at the company's hearing, Donald presented the original letter to the board. My father's face drained of color. My mother sat rigid, lips pressed, eyes staring into the void. Emma stood frozen, arms hanging uselessly at her sides. No one spoke for what felt like an endless minute. I felt no glee, no sense of triumph. Only an odd emptiness, as if my entire life had been climbing toward this point, where truth no longer needed permission to exist. Donald closed his presentation in his steady voice. "The plaintiffs have made false accusations, deliberately using attorneys and media to damage Miss Zoe Turner's dignity and lawful standing. With this evidence, we request all complaints be dismissed and the board conduct a review of internal communications and regulate public statements by its members. No objections, no voices raised." Because there was nothing left to contest. The truth had been spoken aloud in a room I was once barred from entering, and none of them could deny I belonged there. That morning, I sat on a bench in King County Courthouse, pale winter sunlight streaming through the tall windows, glinting on the cold marble floor. Donald sat beside me, his hand resting lightly on the folder, his face composed as ever. I couldn't feel that calm. Inside me was a storm, not from fear of losing, but because I was about to close the book on something long rotted yet still paraded as intact. In the courtroom, Emma sat between my parents, her makeup precise but her eyes dark with sleeplessness. My mother wore an ivory fur coat, her hair pinned tightly back, while my father sat upright, hands clasped as if in a board meeting rather than a trial that could shatter the family's facade. Judge Hollister called the ruling. Everyone's eyes fixed on him, but mine stayed on the folder in front of me. Inside was everything: the trust, the loan letter, the emails, the truth they had ignored. After reviewing all evidence and hearing arguments from both parties, the judge said slowly, the court recognizes Miss Zoe Turner's legal right to 40% ownership of Turner Real Estate Holdings, based on the valid trust and confirmed supplemental agreements. None of them spoke. Not even Emma, who had once accused me without hesitation, could do more than bow her head, her hands clenched in her lap. The court orders the company to update shareholder records, ensuring Miss Turner's voting rights and information are fully acknowledged and transparent. I nodded faintly. Everything unfolded by the book, not dramatic, not noisy. Yet I heard it clearly. The sound of self-respect returning, the sound of a voice I had lost for more than 30 years, finally restored to its rightful place. Afterward, as Donald and I stepped into the courthouse hallway, my father rushed after us. He no longer looked the dignified figure he liked to project, his silver hair disheveled, his tie askew. "Zoe," he called, his voice hoarse. "Wait." I stopped, turned to him. "We need to talk. Alone." I nodded. Donald stepped back, leaving us by the large window overlooking the street. My father sighed. "The company's in trouble. Cash flow is blocked, partners refuse to renew contracts. The banks are tightening the screws." "I know," I said. "The financial report 3 weeks ago listed Turner Holdings under credit risk watch. We need a solution." He lowered his voice. "The family needs you." I looked him straight in the eye. "Does the family need me or my shares?" He blinked, faltered. "Don't say it like that. Without the trust, where would I be right now?" I pressed. "Invited to meetings? Listed as a shareholder? Or still outside the door, waiting for permission to speak?" He stayed silent, and that silence said more than any apology. "I don't want revenge," I said, my tone softer. "But I can't save a structure that cut me out. If you want my cooperation, you have to accept a full restructuring." He looked up, exhaustion plain in his eyes. "What do you want?" "I want executive authority for 6 months to rebuild from the ground up finances and staffing," I answered. "Emma cannot remain CEO. The oversight committee must include independence, and I will have final veto power over any spending above $100,000. "Emma won't agree." "She can refuse," I said. "But then the choice is between losing her position or losing the company altogether." That afternoon, we convened an internal meeting at the company office. No press, no extended relatives, just a round table and the faces now forced to sit as equals. Emma couldn't hide her fury. She slammed her folder on the table, standing to glare at me. "What did you really want from the start? Did you need to humiliate me in front of the board? You never even cared about this company." I raised my head, my voice steady. "No one humiliated you, Emma. You did that when you tried to erase me with false accusations. I didn't steal from you. I reclaimed what was mine, what Mom and Dad once promised Grandpa themselves." My mother, silent until now, finally spoke. "Emma, accept it. This company needs stability." Emma turned to her, disbelief written all over her face. But she said nothing more. She sat down, wiping at her eyes, hands trembling. No one comforted her, no soothing words. Perhaps because everyone finally realized. There was no going back this time. Not with shallow apologies or family banquets meant to smooth it over. I signed the restructuring documents that very afternoon. My signature was firm, precise, as if my whole life had been practiced for that moment. No one in the room objected, no one could deny who I was anymore, no one could make a decision without glancing my way. And for the first time in my life, the Turner family had no choice but to listen, not out of love, but because I had become impossible to ignore. A year passed since the day I signed the company's restructuring papers. Everything changed faster than I expected, though not with the noise or drama you'd read about in the papers or see in films. It was more like a long winter finally thawing. Quiet, steady, and undeniably real. I moved out of my old apartment in North Seattle that March while spring rain still drizzled outside the balcony. On moving day, I lingered at the window, staring down at the little street I'd lived on for years, the same corner cafe with its morning line of customers, the same row of maples shedding their leaves like clockwork. But I wasn't the same anymore. The new penthouse in Capitol Hill was a gift to myself, bought with dividends from Turner Real Estate's first stable quarter under the new structure. I didn't choose anything flashy, but every tile, every cabinet handle, every pane of glass was chosen carefully, less for value than for the feeling that it belonged to me. The balcony stretched wide, facing Lake Washington. Each morning, I sat there with a newspaper and coffee, sometimes letting silence fill the air like a form of meditation. That sense of peace had never existed in my old life, where I was always bracing myself just to survive, to be accepted, to not be left behind. By summer, I bought back my grandfather Henry's old house. It sat in a quiet corner near Bothell, its red brick walls weathered with time, its white picket fence still showing, the care he once put into every detail. I didn't overhaul it. Just fresh paint, a new roof, keeping the oak table and chairs where he'd read the paper every morning, and the antique chandelier he treasured most. But the real change wasn't in the bricks or wood. I turned that house into a scholarship fund, the Henry Turner Foundation. It was nonprofit, offering tuition and living assistance to high school students who dreamed of college but lacked resources. Each admissions season, I personally reviewed applications, interviewed candidates, and awarded the first scholarships with a feeling no money could buy, the sense of not only winning, but creating something new from old wounds. As for Emma, I no longer followed her closely, but news reached me naturally through former employees, mutual contacts in investment circles, or hesitant texts from my mother. I heard Emma now managed a small fashion boutique in Ballard. The store wasn't large, but it was clean, minimalist, selling sustainable brands instead of chasing trends. She lived in a studio apartment, paid her own rent, woke up early, managed her own schedule. Things she once scoffed at as boring and unworthy of ambition. One October afternoon, I passed by that shop. I didn't go in, just stood across the street. I saw Emma folding shirts, chatting with a customer, her hair tied high, her frame leaner, her face tired but stripped of arrogance. I didn't feel triumphant, nor pity, only calm. Over the past year, my mother had sent many messages. At first casual check-ins, then longer, more genuine ones. She no longer hid her awkwardness when calling me daughter, no longer tried to appear unshakable. Sometimes she asked my opinion on family or finances. Other times she simply sent photos of flowers from her garden with a line, "You'd like this color." My father spoke less. He never apologized. But at last month's shareholder meeting, he stepped aside to let me present to the Bactions board. As I walked up to the podium, he sat upright, eyes steady on me. When I finished, he gave a short nod. Subtle, unembellished, but I understood it meant more than acknowledgement. I didn't need it anymore, but I was grateful it came late, but clean. In my new office, I hung a small wooden frame. Inside was my grandfather Henry's handwritten letter and the old safe key. It rested on a pine shelf near the window, where afternoon light faded the blue ink but left every word legible. There will come a day when you'll need this truth to protect yourself. I read that line often on quiet evenings, not to dwell on the past, but to remind myself why I stood up. Beneath the frame sat my notebook, filled with each stage of the foundation plans to expand. Letters from students already helped. Every page was a continuation of life, an extension I believed my grandfather would smile to see. I no longer lived for recognition. I lived to never lose myself again. And I hung that frame there, among the things I rebuilt from what once felt shattered, as a reminder. Truth needs no permission to exist. Justice need not rush. And sometimes strength doesn't come from defeating someone, but from no longer needing to. I sat back in the leather chair by the window, watching city lights reflect off the penthouse glass. In the distance stood the silhouette of my grandfather's old house, now a place of hope for students without means, a small light in this vast city, warm enough to guide someone like the younger me. I once thought I needed acknowledgement, an apology, a late embrace, or a real family dinner. But I learned not everyone changes, and not every bond must be mended for you to live in peace. What matters is that you no longer let those wounds define your worth. Maybe you've been pushed aside in your own family. Maybe you've sacrificed unseen, laughed off humiliation just to keep the peace. But one day, you'll rise not for revenge, but to live. A life untouched by others' control, and when that day comes, you'll know as I did that you never had to beg for a place. You were always worthy of it. If you've been through something similar or have thoughts after hearing my story, share them in the comments. I'd love to hear your perspective about family, about justice, about reclaiming your own worth. And if you want to keep walking with me through real emotional stories of people who rise after being broken, subscribe to this channel. Because life has no shortage of tragedies, but what makes it beautiful is how we overcome them.